research activities at EIPM. I'm really glad to be with you today just to deep dive a little bit in the topic of ecosystem. So I still see quite a lot of people still getting in. So we really have a very broad representation of countries today. Huh? So we've got people from Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Thailand on the Asian side, and on the other side you get quite a lot of people from Argentina, from Brazil, Costa Rica, quite a few from Mexico as well, and yeah, people from Europe. So, well, thanks for being with us for this webinar. Just starting with the classic kind of introduction. Use the chat anytime to ask question. You should find it probably on the right side of your screen. So pose the question you want whenever you want. Sometime I might just take them on the fly. Sometime I might wait till the end of the, let's say, the chapter of the presentation, and then I will, try to answer your questions. End of the webinar, you will be able to get a link for the video replay. You can look at it again if you want, or you can pass the information to someone else, and you will receive a copy of the presentation, a copy of the slides in PDF, together with one article I've written on one part of the overall topic we'll be covering today. So you'll get quite some material that can, really help you to move forward with the topic. At the end, we'll have a short survey just to get your feedback. So thanks for completing it. And I see that, yeah, it's starting to stabilize in terms of audience. So let's move ahead. So topic of this webinar is about working in an ecosystem. Last webinar was about, back to the basics in terms of innovation. This were really, trying to deep dive a little bit on a more specific topic, maybe a bit more leading edge, but really something, I find quite fascinating. It's a big part of our research activities around the topics of innovation, but also this topic of ecosystem. Okay. Still a few people coming in, just a few words. EIPM, pure player, only education related to purchasing everywhere in the world. We've got 2 campuses, Geneva, Shanghai, and we've got 7 branches, including Mexico, Brazil, India, and a few others. But 4,000 people trained every year, and we are very keen to drive our education programs through research. So a lot of activities, gathering case studies, publishing academic research, and what I'm going to show you today is one of the outcomes from this activity. Number of takeaways that I'd like you to benefit from during the afternoon, the session, let's say. Why do we talk more and more about business ecosystems, innovation ecosystem? Why this word is, coming up more and more? What is it? What ecosystem do? Very important point. And how to do the analysis of an ecosystem and how to work within an ecosystem. Really some strong message toward the end on this point, but we really need to go through all these elements before getting there. Something I will ask you is just to, this is kind of a leading edge, new area, things we've started to see more and more over the past few years. And I think it's different from the classic supply chain structure that we have. And very often when we see something quite new, we look at it through the eyes of the past. So don't stop at what you recognize. Just be open, act as a beginner, reflect on your experience, but just don't try to, jump on what you've already seen that might look like this. So, just be open to look at it slightly differently if you want. So why do we have, are we talking about these ecosystems, and what do they do? So I always enjoy to go back a little bit in history. Some of you have been joining previous webinars, and you might have noticed this. So if we go back something like 100 years ago, a lot of the companies were vertically integrated. So if you take something like the Ford Motor Company, the vision, the dream of Mr. Henry Ford was to have under one roof every single steps from the raw materials to having a car going out and reaching the customer. So everything was done. The whole industry was covered by one company. And even if you look a little later, if you think of a company like IBM in the 50s and 60s, you know, there would be some people working for IBM going to pick some sand, doing some chemical treatment to the sand, then turning the sand into silicium, then from the silicium building some electronic components, and all that was still done in, you know, the sites, manufacturing sites of IBM, putting that onto a PC board, computer, and then putting the software in it and delivering that to the client. So everything was done by IBM. And what happened over time was industries have started to be, you know, cut in smaller pieces. Companies have started to globalize and outsource, and we started to see emerging what we've called supply chain and value chain, where there was more than one player. There were different layers, if you want, into the full end-to-end process needed to, you know, deliver a product, manufacture anything, even services. And recently, so this was even more with the full globalization process that took place, this became more and more complex with more layers into the chain. And recently, with all the, you know, waves of innovation in terms of digitalization coming in, every player is trying to do something different. And suddenly, what used to be one company that became a chain is now becoming something a bit more complex. We talk about disintermediation, we talk about ecosystems. And that's what you see on the screen, where, you know, it's not just like a clear, you know, chain. There's a lot of players, you know, your company, some service providers, some complementers, some people who are trying to resell others' product with a bit of added value. You have competitors that might be also your suppliers. They can also be your client. Your suppliers are sometimes also, you know, your clients. So the world is becoming a bit more complex. And what we see as well is, you know, some startups, universities, R&D centers, influencers that we need to take into account into all the potential that could create value. So we talked a bit about business ecosystem in the past. Over the few years, we've been talking about innovation ecosystems. And then recently, with the rise of platforms, type of business, I'll come back on this, what we've seen is more and more talk about, you know, ecosystems. So interesting terminology emerging from different angle. So let's try to describe a simple case of, you know, one ecosystem. We'll see a few through the conversation, but that one is a simple example of an ecosystem. So it's autonomous ship. So very often, every time you'll see some, you know, major digital transformation with the word smart, autonomous, digital, then, you know, behind that, it's not just one company making it happen. It's not just one company with one-to-one relationship with a few partners. It's usually a bit more of a, you know, complex group of companies getting together and working in delivering this new digital solution. So here we're talking about the autonomous ship, so a ship that can go on the sea without any crew, and development. There's some prototypes currently running. So one of the major companies that has been behind this has been Rolls-Royce Maritime Business. They were benefiting from the Rolls-Royce digital lab, with the support from Tata as a IT company, but also they have part of their existing supplier like Delta Marine, Inmarsat, DNV, quite a number of players who can contribute to access to data, being able to implement all the digital solution to create an autonomous ship. So these are the existing value chain members, the existing suppliers or maybe suppliers of suppliers that are part of the ecosystem. And we also have new players. So they had to go to the European Space Agency so they could get access, for instance, to satellites information, or they've been working with Google for the machine learning algorithm for recognition. So when the autonomous ship gets inside the harbor, the autonomous ship is sensors all around it and taking pictures of everything that's coming its way and trying to recognize what this is. Is it a small boat that's going to make a collision, or is it like a crane in the air? And so being able to send the information so that the ship can react to these types of situations. So what happened here is the companies are working together, trying to build a vision, creating some standards in order to jointly design this autonomous ship. And they have collaboration in order to make it work. And one of the influencer is not an economic actor in the sense of selling something, but it's the Finnish innovation agency who's supporting this organization to do some of the research activities and enabling them as a platform to come together. So here, a company alone can't create an autonomous ship. It's actually a consortium. It's actually an ecosystem organization, and maybe some of them could be competing in some occasions, but here they need to collaborate together in order to bring some of these innovation forward. So that's an example of ecosystem. When do we use the word ecosystem? So trying to help you spot situations where you might have heard about this. So, I mean, a few years ago, we started to hear companies like Procter & Gamble saying, our job is not to design and invent everything, but we need to work with other companies, be open to innovation coming from outside, and we will be at the center, of this group of organization, the architect combining together all of these innovation in order to bring something new to the market. For me, it's sometimes perceived, I see that, still classic kind of one-to-one bilateral contract with a lot of different players, but the Rolls-Royce case is one where, it's a little bit more of a organization, companies collaborating, not just one-to-one, but on a broader scale here. Sometimes the ecosystem is not really managed by the company or leaders within a certain company, but they're managed through a platform. So if you think of Google and Android that you might have on your phone, or Apple and its iOS system, this is a platform, and the rules associated with being one of the contributor to an app, of a game, or whatever solution is part of the structure of the platform and all the agreements as a partner of Google. And so this is a platform that bringing customers on one hand, suppliers on the other hand, and this is Android for the consumer market. But if you look at things like Predix from General Electric, but there's many others IoT platforms. So this is like industrial digital platform where you can access a lot of external data. You can access different bits of software. You can bring all of your data coming from humans, from objects, and then you can apply whatever you want in terms of algorithm analytics to these in order to deliver new services. So that also exists from an industrial point of view, and that brings quite a lot of providers, capabilities, sources that can be taken in one place to create value. And sometime you will find out that some of the ecosystems might not be managed by a company. They might be managed like by a foundation, by somehow a not-for-profit organization. or they can be totally self-managed. So if you think in terms of open source, very often at the heart of open source development, you will have a foundation. So it's an organization that brings a lot of companies and members together, and they form an ecosystem. Or they can bring individuals together and they form an ecosystem that are putting resources into developing something new. And we even have, if you go back to the early time of the Silicon Valley, ecosystems that are totally self-managed. The only person that was really running the ecosystem of the Silicon Valley was the guy running the bar, where a few evenings per week he would welcome everyone, all the people working on electronic components and pieces of software together. They will show their toys, their prototypes to each other. And there, that would be a sort of an open market where people would start to work together on something new. This is where Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak met together, and this is where they brought some of their resources that led them to create Apple as a company. So no one's really running it. That's an interesting type of a situation. So a lot of different situations where you're going to have some ecosystems, all these company or individuals coming together to create value, but they can be quite different in nature. So how would I define an ecosystem? So an ecosystem brings together different capabilities. At the end of the day, you will see suppliers, organization, but the aim of the ecosystem is to leverage the diversity of capabilities so they can be assembled into an architecture. And ecosystems can work because the architecture is quite modular. If you think of the Android, any kind of a seller can plug his solution, his app into the system. It's quite easy. You don't need to spend years trying to understand how these two things are going to fit together. All the people in the Silicon Valley were, show me your electronic components. I can add this one to it. We can put that into this box. So this was a world of rather modular type of product and systems, and a lot of the work around autonomous shape are about creating standards that will really help to make things a bit more modular, so everybody can plug into a broader architecture. So capabilities complementing each other, integrating in an architecture that's quite modular, so everybody can work on his bit of a problem and make a contribution to the broader picture. And the role of the ecosystem is to bring some element of coordination, and doesn't mean this is like driven by humans. In Android, it's a market coordination. Buyer meets seller easily in it, but it's a form of coordination, and that creates alignment and that creates value. So Rolls-Royce, the consortium, organization come together. There's alignment on how to build an architecture, how to create the structure for an autonomous shape. Or the Silicon Valley, people meet together and say, hey, yeah, you can make a computer for students out of this if I add this part, this part, this part, and value can be generated out of that. And what you have is something where the different players don't always, are in the mode of purely collaboration or purely competition. You often have a little bit of both. As I mentioned, every player who's bringing an app into Android, they, at the same time, they collaborate because they agree to come in one place, and at the same time, they compete because they all want to get the attention from the user and make sure they will sell their own app. So there's this nature of competition, collaboration, and Silicon Valley same. Really, it's all about collaborating, but also competing because everybody wants their ideas and resources and solutions to go to the top, and not just to disappear quickly. So back to so I've tried to create a picture of what is an ecosystem and how it's different from maybe what we see often. Now, day to day, when we're on LinkedIn, where we look at documents, market intelligence, magazines, we see the word ecosystem coming in. And this can mean three things. It's often used by practitioner as a way of describing an environment, as a way of describing a strategy, or as a way of outlining the organization of different players working together. So I'm going to give you some examples, hoping that you can recognize these, and then you can start to understand what we're talking about. So sometime you will see these pictures. Okay, so if you look at CB Insight website, but there's many of these. So you see these boxes that are grouping all the players that are performing certain activities or functions, and they're all brought together. And here, this is the ecosystem for artificial intelligence in the automotive world. Wow. And you have, people working, companies working on processors that can be used to train the artificial intelligence, some doing controllers, some doing processors that are embedded into the system that leverage the artificial intelligence, some producing data and bringing data sets. So, it's pretty broad, wide. So there's not one supplier, there's not a market, but there's a diversity of capabilities with different players supporting maybe similar or slightly different types of capabilities. And you can look at this and say, with whom could I be working? With whom could I be collaborating in order to move forward in terms of the next development? So that's the ecosystem as a picture of the environment that can support me in bringing some innovation. So maybe some of the projects you have in your companies that relate to digital transformation and bringing some digital product in your companies, well, you could be in a situation where you're not going to put together just a relationship with one company, but maybe, looking to work with a few, because you need more than one in order to bring that types of innovation. So the second thing you will see is the ecosystem as a strategy. And I really like that picture because this is really bringing the essence of this. So this is last year, Daimler and BMW, so Mercedes and BMW, they've agreed to have a collaboration, in fact, a joint venture around mobility services. Okay. So a few years before, everybody was saying that, one day, you will have these big companies will be ending up competing with some of the mobility service company like Uber or others. And then suddenly you see, two of the main OEMs that have been competing with each other, suddenly creating a joint venture, and they're putting all the players with whom they can start to collaborate at the center of the picture. So this is really the signal of a new strategy in terms of, moving into the future. Not the classic way of here is a new car, and by the way, some of the components are coming from this company and that company, so you can, but no, it's like my strategy is to work with these small tech companies or emerging tech companies and to really think mobility has a whole all together. So you have here some of the tech companies working on chargers, some of the tech companies working on parking aspects, some pure mobility players. So quite interesting. It's not like they all do the same thing or they all bring only one part, because you need multiple capabilities to bring this forward. And I like this picture with the two. So with two companies working together here. So that's really the depiction of an ecosystem as a strategic move in terms of bringing something new to life. And the last one that we see sometimes is this types of picture where we put a company at the center, we put an organization at the center, and then we try to put all the organization that's part of its ecosystem. So what you see here in the middle is Apollo Auto. So this is Baidu. Baidu is a Chinese company, an internet giant, and they've decided a few years ago, 3 years ago, something like that, that their future would be into autonomous vehicle, for instance. And they launched a project, Apollo Auto, and today they've got 250 companies collaborating to it. They've got car manufacturers, they've got chip makers, processor makers, traditional suppliers of automotive They've got, companies providing maps, operating systems, cloud service by Microsoft, some hardware, sensors that you can put on the car. And in fact, here you just have a few names, but today, I think, if I remember well, they've got more than 200 companies. Here, you've got every single car manufacturer in the world that, if you look at the page of collaboration, it feels like they're all there. They're all part of this ecosystem. And what they do is, they've created the backbone for autonomous driving in terms of software, and this is open source. So everyone wants to be part of it because this is something open source where, you can quickly get access to it, leverage it, and the benefit of being part of this ecosystem is you've got access to hardware, you've got access to the software backbone, and very quickly, within 2 weeks, you can start experimenting. And data is being accumulated, and they're already well ahead of everyone else in China in terms of number of hours of driving and ability to, kind of do the right thing in this environment. So all these organizations are kind of part of the ecosystem of the Apollo project from Baidu, and they all, contribute to create, if you want, a mass of activities, a mass of development, a mass of data, a mass of components that are going into this architecture that will support the autonomous car. So here what we see is much more of an organization, and that organization here is a project by a company, but this could have been Rolls-Royce and all the partners, or this could have been a foundation with all the members of the foundation that are joining for an open source project, for instance. So you've got a diversity of organization here, but that's an example of picture. So important thing is we might see the ecosystem as an environment, these boxes where we can find organization we can decide to work with. We might see the ecosystem as a strategy. I'm going to work as an ecosystem to deliver mobility for Daimler and BMW, or in the end, I'm going to be presenting the ecosystem as an organization with a foundation, a company, a project in the middle, and everyone around contributing to it. So I think that's quite useful because after when you bump into this picture, you can relate it to one of these three elements. What I'd like to drive your attention to is if we still have a network of suppliers that we manage through bilateral contracts, one-to-one relationship, for me, this wouldn't be an ecosystem. We have an ecosystem is, more than two players start to get together, work together, collaborate, maybe when they compete, or maybe before they were competing and they change. And it's not just managed through vertical supply chain structure where someone's giving order to someone else, but it's a little bit more open in terms of bringing different capabilities that can adjust and get together and move ahead. And very often I'm starting, hearing people, they say instead of talking about the supply base, the supply network, they're starting to talk about the supplier ecosystem. I think that's kind of abusing a little bit the language, because I think it's important to make a distinction, because you don't manage relationship exactly in the same way if you have these ecosystems and if you have this more classic type of one-to-one relationship. But everybody calls what they want in the end, but that's just my view. First point I'd like to share with you, and I've really taken time to explain what it is and how it can be a bit different from what we have today, but the first thing I'd like to share with you is you can map ecosystems. Okay, so you can look at all the existing players that could be contributing, all the capabilities that exist that you can leverage in order to bring something new to the market, for instance. So one of the exercises I do every year with my executive MBA student is around the distribution of champagne. It's not just distribution, it's the full value chain of champagne. I give them like hundreds of startups, small description of startups, and then I tell them, so, create for me, I give them a methodology for that, a map of the ecosystem. And on this map, what we have is, the existing supplier and customers here, the company running it. So here you've got, the usual suspects that you would be having, might be supplier of supplier as well. And what we put as well is all the rising and new players. So who could be joining into the picture, who could end up, contributing to bringing some value into the future, bringing new capabilities. So here for the distribution of champagne, we've identified, my students have identified smart packaging, last mile delivery, label for counterfeiting on authenticity, using algorithm for demand production. So yeah, quite a lot of the new cold chain solutions. So quite a lot of solutions emerging currently in terms of distribution. And that was a few years ago, and it was quite interesting. So out of that, they were supposed to come back with one innovation concept out of looking at the diversity of capabilities that could be leveraged. And for instance, some of them said, we could have these people on a bike and they could be carrying a bottle of champagne. So you bring them to your party, they're dressing up and they can serve champagne at your party, for instance. It's cold, it's fresh, right temperature, fantastic. What was interesting is when I shared that with people working in the field of champagne was that that already exists. So, but they were quite interested to see that with all these startups cards and all these methodology for ecosystem mapping, then the executive MBA students were very fast to come up with quite a number of ideas and concepts, and some of them were already under development or had just been developed. So it was quite impressive to see in terms of the fit. So what's the methodology to map an ecosystem? You will receive an article together. I've been writing for the European Business Review together with one of my executive MBA students. And basically this is describing a methodology in these 6 steps. Define your scope, where you want to work on, what will be your ecosystem. And then what we try is to look broad, okay? The risk is we always want to look at specific. So let's open the world. Let's look broad and look at all the key trends that could impact on, the distribution of a product like champagne or whatever you want in terms of luxury goods or, just one example. And then when we look at the trends, what's going to be happening into the future that could be changing, everything in terms of customers, in terms of economics, in terms of politics, in terms of consumers. So there's a number of headings you can look at in terms of trend. And then we say, hey, if this trend is materializing, what does it mean in terms of players, actors? So who could be new players into the ecosystem? And then we map the ecosystem with what I've described a bit before, the one that are already in and the newcomers. Yeah? And then we try to analyze the dynamic. Today, who's competing with whom? Daimler, BMW competing together, Lyft, Uber competing together. Maybe tomorrow, what will happen tomorrow? So maybe, these big, car manufacturers will compete with Uber or Lyft. Or maybe they'll be collaborating together. That could be a second option. So trying to understand how the ecosystem could be evolving and who could be working with whom in terms of generating value into the future, which help you to define the next steps in terms of, who we should be partnering, who we should be monitoring, who we should be, starting some proof of concept with. So it's an interesting way also to come up with some projects to develop some innovation. That's sometimes when I present this, people tell me, my friend Hervé, I already do this. I do 5 forces, Porter. Hey, done that for years. Seen that at school, keep doing it, still useful. I said, just be careful, because the whole logic of a Porter 5 forces is you focus on competition. You focus on what's already happening in the market and what's happening today in the market. And then when you understand who competes with whom and who are the 3 players that are fighting for the bigger cake, then you start to understand how the forces of the market and the trends are going to influence this competition. And it's true that you look at alternatives, but if they're not immediately impacting on, well, you tend to look at them and leave them a little bit aside. So I think what's really important with the ecosystem approach is really to look into the future, is really to look broad, and then really keeping attention on both competition and collaboration. Today, tomorrow. So I don't think it's really exactly doing the same thing. I don't think it's the same mindset. Yeah. I've got a question about software. Whereby really my advice is, of course you can build a software that can help you to map, but I think there's using the internet is very useful, or using providers of information to get access to some of the new players. So you can use your classic market intelligence providers. You can use some source of information. CB Insight is a good one, in order to get access to new players, new companies, innovative companies. But when it comes to really mapping the ecosystem, the best thing is just to have a big wall, and on the wall just to put all the trends, and have a good discussion with people from your company and maybe people from outside, and what do they mean, these trends, and what could be their implication, and how important they are. So the quality of the discussion is important. And when you start to map your ecosystem, it's good to have people from different backgrounds so they can bring their views. And same for about competing, collaborating, and who we should be working with. I think it's about the quality of the conversation. It's not about getting the picture right within a software, I would say. So yeah, that would be my answer to your question. Okay. So, been describing a few things. What's an ecosystem? What ecosystem do? And now I need to get into the more recent development we've done in terms of research, is how to work in an ecosystem. So, your companies have decided to establish some collaboration with external players, and maybe you join an organization supporting some external development, and you're part of this, and your suppliers are part of this. So what's important to know in terms of making this effective and efficient? I'll start by a simple case that's meant to try to make you understand the challenge. So one of my executive MBA students was working in one of the capital cities in Europe. He was working in a bank, and the bank was interesting to gain visibility with students, university students. So they've been mapping, the ecosystem that was going from linking university and banks, and the students, and they look at all the players, and who they are, what they do, and they found this organization, which is like an association, but it's a social entrepreneur. It's actually students from university who decided to create this organization that would be offering across the city a number of a study space. So basically, homeowners, you and me, or the people in that city, could offer a garage, a part of a building that students could be using to come and study together, or even relax a little bit, this kind of things. And so you start to see this ecosystem with the bank, the study space, the owners, the university, and the student. And what happened is, when the bank started to talk to this organization, people were very keen here, because you could provide resources, sports equipment, or some, computers, stuff like that could be located in the different places. This would be fantastic for the students, but we would be having our logo information. This would be fine. And university was getting a bit tense about having the bank everywhere in this place, because they were also subsidizing. But at the end of the day, they realized that the university, then they were not controlling the system. They were not able to provide that by themselves. So they compromised, and they say, okay, that seems to be good value. So they went along with the scheme to deploy some of the branding and some of the support. But there were some issues in the end, because some of the homeowners some of the owners of the space for the study space, sometimes were offices, other companies than the bank, and for them, they weren't really keen to have the stuff from the bank inside their office. Their own agenda, own contribution. And you also had religious institutions like churches who had rooms, and they said, yeah, we are happy to share that, but they didn't really welcome the idea of having access, the students having access to equipment that was sponsored by the bank inside their wall. So this is really helping us to understand the two most important elements whenever we work in an ecosystem. If we work in an ecosystem, we need to make sure that everybody benefits from working in the ecosystem, that value is flowing between all the members of the ecosystem, that everyone is happy about the overall value generated by the ecosystem, but also by the benefit they get and what they contribute. So it's really important. It's not just about you and your main partner to be happy about it. It's about making sure there's a positive equation for everyone. And if you just focus on your immediate partner, the one you want to get most benefit out maybe, or the one you want to steer the rest, and you don't pay attention what's happening beyond in terms of everyone gaining value, delivering the right value, then you're going to get into trouble. You don't see what's really happening, and the degree of collaboration will very quickly vanish. And the second element is not about value, it's about values. All of these, they don't need to have exactly the same culture and ideology, because you want to bring organizations who have different background, know-how, capability. But they need to have at the core a number of common values that can be shared across, that supports really the flow of the value at the more day-to-day level. So it's also important to understand, if you work here, the mindset of the players around, making sure that there's some common values, there's a common background that will support decisions and engagement. So the value flow and the sharing of values are very important in ecosystem. And if you don't have that working in harmony, then it's not going to go very far. And very quickly you will see the ecosystem like losing momentum and stopping to be efficient. So that's really simple case here. But you're going to say, do we have that in business? Well, very often. Just going to share a little bit about quite an impressive project. I guess there's some people from the telecom industry, so maybe some of you have heard about this. So this is something that was started in 2016. It's the Telecom Infra project. And basically, this is 500 companies, so 500 members today, companies, organizations, joining forces in order to put together their resources, their engineer, to develop and design the future that we're going to be supporting, for instance, the 5G deployment. So this is really covering every steps of the telecom process, from managing core networks to the backhaul to the final access to the user. And this is covering both software and hardware. So you have telecom operators playing into this. So we've seen some here, Vodafone, Dutch Telecom, Telefonica, and most of the operators across the world. We've got technology providers like Nokia, and processor provider like Intel. We've got technology providers, Cisco, HP. So it's quite a broad range of organization. And startups, there's also like in different labs across the world, startups joining forces on some of the project with all these companies. It's all organized by project, and you can start new projects in the field, and people can come together, start to work on it. Here we start to see the list. I think it was like a year and a half ago, so maybe there's more projects already now. But they have 12 to 15 projects running currently. And it's open source. So everything that's being developed here, you can already find on GitHub, which is an open source repository, some of the software bit or the description of the hardware. It's massive collaboration. All these engineers, all these marketing people, designers coming together from different companies, 500, in order to work on project that's and really the idea is to pull the best mind together and instead of competing, instead of fighting against different standards, fighting together, it's really trying to get everything into one roof in terms of the architecture and the different components, pulling resources, accelerating innovation. But what are the challenge? How to manage this? You certainly have people in this network who are a little bit concerned about, will they benefit from it? Do they get the value back if they put the errors into it? They're concerned about is every organization having the right spirit, the right mindset. It's open source, so can I protect my IP or whatever? So you got a lot of certainly these issues playing into this very broad network. So it's rather new, 3 years. Well, probably not even, because so all the challenge I've described about the flow of value and the sharing of values, certainly going through this type of ecosystem currently. So interesting case of very mass collaboration, very large ecosystem supporting the full industry into going into important future development. Let me give you some hints. So let's say tomorrow you're working on maybe a digital project in your company, and you need to have a number of organizations getting together in a consortium, in a broader foundation, open source, whatever, working in an ecosystem. So what can you do in order to help support everybody going into the right direction? I think you need to look at both the existing members that and new members coming into the picture, and you need to look at the human level. So it's about the individual pushing and having the motivation to work on this. So trying to understand always, what motivation drives people. What are the pain points? What are the problems they don't want to see happening? What are the constraints that prevent them from going faster and further? But also, what are their vision of the future? And as soon as you really pay attention to these fundamentals, you're really trying to understand behind every individual who play a key role in driving the ecosystem, their motivation, their pain point, the problem they face, the constraint they have, but their vision of the future. You've got a basic understanding of the dynamic that will drive or not collaboration. And what's really important is to address these elements, align on these elements, and making sure that you can have the common values and the right flow of value within these types of ecosystem. So maybe you could say, sometime when we are managing the relationship between one company and a supplier, you have all these stakeholders from both sides. And you need to understand their motivation, the problem they face, the constraint they have, and what they want to achieve in the future in the same way. But here you have that across a number of organizations, so that's quite challenging. That's why I describe as it's an academic concept. It's the concept of cognitive fluidity. So they used to be an adventure movie where some of the superheroes ended up fighting against each other, and in the last adventure movies, they were all together, saving the world against Thanos. And so what was happening here? They were rejecting contradictions. Very often, when we have a number of players around the table, some of the players start to say it's got to be black or white. It can't be both. Okay, so we need to take a decision. Is that black or is that white? We're looking for consistency. Everything that doesn't fit immediately with the puzzle, we reject it. And very often we come from another background and we come with a certain way of looking at the world. Very often people who've never been working in the open source world, they just immediately see the risk associated with open source. Or people who've not been working a lot with IP issues, they just see, the risk associated with, some of the IP aspects. So we have this kind of natural reactions, kind of the fear and the concerns, and we tend to see things through past experience and using some preconceived ideas. And that's selecting specific signals and reaction, and suddenly things block. It's really getting rigid. Nobody can get to decision. People, you only see the disagreement, and then everybody's starting to say, hey, that's not going to work. So the challenge, by understanding the motivation, by understanding the pain point and the vision, is to instill a bit more cognitive fluidity. So as part of the conversation is making sure that we can handle inconsistencies. Okay, so on one hand, we want to have a better performance and lower cost, and we don't know yet if it's possible to get the both at the same time, and it feels contradictory, but let's wait a little bit. Let's park this somewhere. Let's keep these contradictory goals and see if we can make a good step towards them. So not rejecting things if they look dissonant from the start. Also, accepting these forces and maybe trying to see, how they can work together. Spending some time to align these different cognitive frames. So why do you believe that this intellectual property issue is important to consider? Why do you believe that this shouldn't be the, trying to make sure in this discussion that, people don't leave a lot of feeling under the table, or just, put some of the worst feeling or their gut on the table, and the discussion becomes bitter. So I think it's quite important. And it's not just about talking and interacting. It's also a lot about, agreeing quickly to move to experimentation and further interaction to solve the problem. It's a bit like in some of the diplomatic negotiation. Let's agree on what we can agree, and go do a bit of work, and then get back together quickly so we can move forward. So that's really about cognitive fluidity. That's easy to get things rigid because it's just applying the usual way of doing things, and always blaming the other for preventing things to move forward. Cognitive fluidity is about allowing our view of the world to evolve, to get together, to interact in a positive way. What does it mean? How can you make that happen? So a lab is about the conversation where you get different players. Focus on why. So very often we're looking, 3 levels down the ground. That's very detailed stuff, and say that's not going to work. Okay, but why are we here? What's the objective? What are we trying to achieve? Is this the biggest blocking factor in the picture? So get back to the why. Very important. What drives us to come and do something together? Sometimes we need to accept that things might not, be consistent today. Let's park them, come back on it. Let's keep them as a, an objective, something we want to achieve. Because if we reject things, then it's going to be difficult to move forward. Don't forget, it's about the people being part of it. It's about their motivation. It's about the purpose they have and the concern they have. And what's really important in this ecosystem is really to have some mature conversation. It's very easy to fall down on bitter talks and kind of a silly simple argumentation. So let's try to be honest. Let's try to say what we know, what we don't know, what we're not sure about. Let's not hide always our weaknesses or uncertainties, and be open, be honest, have mature conversation. That's the only way to move forward in terms of innovation and this type of situation. Finally, build on what's common across people and experiment. Find a nice beach where you can land an experiment. Don't take your most critical customer. Don't go on the most challenging project. Find a nice place where you can play with things, where you can try things. and learn from this experimentation. Very often seems to be impossible at the beginning. People get together, they start working, building prototype, developing something, and then yesterday's problem, they suddenly look less of an issue after you've been making some progress and developing some understanding. So working in an ecosystem is demanding, is challenging, but this is the way forward for many industry to, get to the next stage in terms of development. The future is no more going to be invented in isolation by one company. The future is often going to be developed and designed through collaboration amongst different players who might be competing at the same time. We need to have people supporting this development. Doesn't need always to be purchasing, but we have a role to play when we have within this table our suppliers and people from our organization. I think it's important to realize that there is something we can do from a purchasing point of view here. There is something we can bring to the table. We've got this understanding of the business aspect. We've got this understanding of the technology. We've got this understanding of the human interactions. And I think, we can add value to, understand ecosystems and support different organizations working as an ecosystem together. So take advantage of this. Not all of you will have a situation where they have that in front of them, but most of your companies will be working on projects where it's not just going to be one-to-one relationship going to make a difference, but it will be a bit more complex situations with multiple players. An ecosystem project is not different from another innovation project. You would map progress against the same milestones. You would the speed wouldn't be so usually different from any other innovation project. What matters is, are all the players, aligned, both on the values and on the value they can contribute and get out of it. And if the all of the players are in the same positive mindset and see the benefits, you're really adding the capabilities of everyone in a collaborative mode, and things can go fast and can be really powerful. We'll always depend on the industry pace, but it's really interesting development we have ahead. So thank you for attending. Thank you. If you have a question, it's time to share them. Coevolution, competition, collaboration. So, picture of an ecosystem, but cognitive fluidity, making sure that everybody can contribute. Okay, I've got a message from Antonio. Congratulations, good discussion on a complex topic, especially the management of the people involved. Yeah, at the end of the day, it's might be a big innovation concept, but at the end of the day, what makes the difference is the people inside it and how we drive them to work together and to have some fun and deliver a vision, but also not ignoring problems, not ignoring constraints, and finding ways to harness the power of multiple players to get into the forefront. Any other question? So thanks for your wide attendance. We'll be having the next webinar on the topic of agility. What else? You're going to be having an opportunity to fill in feedback just afterwards. We've really decided to take a topic a bit more advanced than last time on innovation. We went to get back to the basics on innovation last time. We might redo this one into the future because there was such a high level of interest, but this time we wanted to get into a bit more specific topic of ecosystem. The topic on agility will be a little bit back to some basics, but innovative way of running some agile vendor selection. So it's going to be quite interesting. And yeah, we'll have more into the future. Hope to see you at some of our events. Hope to see you in some of our class. Wherever you are in the world, there should be some opportunities for you to join. And well, enjoy the weekend coming. and looking forward to see you into the future. Thanks for your attention. Bye-bye. And you'll get all the slides into the package very quickly. Don't worry for that. Good point. Thanks a lot.